Good morning, everybody. So I would like you to take your Unit 8 packet that you just received, and we're going to be starting statistics today. So if you would open to the back of the first page, you'll see it says Statistical Studies right here. You can see it as well. And I want you actually to take a moment, and I'd like you to pause the video and just read this whole page. Okay, so take a moment, pause, really read it, try to understand what everything is saying, and then unpause and we'll go over it. All right, so basically there's a few key things that we need to know. And they're kind of outlined right here: observational study, a survey, and an experiment. I don't think that any of this is anything that's really crazy for you to understand. An observational study, so if I were to be standing in the doorway right now, but I was invisible, and I sat there and I observed how well you are with the substitute right now, that would be me just observing and watching. I'm not doing anything except watching. That's an observational study. A survey would be, and again, I'm sure you've taken surveys before. Hey, we have this new soda and I want you to try it out and tell me what you think, and I give you a list of questions to answer, maybe on a piece of paper or something like that, and you answer those questions. That would be a survey. Experiment, listen, you're all in science and you understand kind of what an experiment is. So here are the key things about experiments, and you might want to highlight these or underline these, but experiments are randomly assigned groups. Randomly assigned groups. So I just highlighted that for you. There is a control group, and then there's the experimental group. Now, you know that usually, like for example, let's say we're testing the efficacy of a new drug, okay, and we want to see whether it helps heal people from, let's say, a certain disease. So some people may get the experimental drug and some will get a placebo, which is really just like a sugar pill. It doesn't really do anything. That would be more of what we would call an experiment. We are manipulating, okay, our study here. Okay, and then lastly, so we have the observational study, we have the survey, we have the experiment, and here is the last thing that you need to know. In an experiment, random assignment refers to randomly assigning subjects to certain groups. So, for example, half the people get the new drug, experimental drug, and half get a placebo, aka a sugar pill, okay? And that's what we call random assignment, because I could just take, let's say, 12 people and, okay, hey, you random 6 people, you're gonna get the new treatment drug, and you other 6 people, you're gonna get the placebo. Obviously, we wouldn't tell them that what they're getting, they don't know, that's part of the experiment. But randomly assigning is a big overarching theme in an experiment, okay? All right, now, here's the other thing. Only experiments allow for cause and effect. And that is the big thing that you need to know, okay? So when we're going through the next page and the page after that and the page after that, the things that I've highlighted, which you also should have either highlighted, circled, underlined, whatever you need to do. And if you haven't done that, pause the video and make sure that you highlight everything that I have highlighted right here. Now, one last little thing at the bottom here. It says, note, a census is an official count or survey of a population. Okay, you may see that pop up every once in a while. So again, please make sure you have these things highlighted. And then you're going to turn the page and we're going to look at page 3. All right, so I'd like you to take a moment, and why don't you read, how about we just do the first 2 questions? Okay, so you're going to pause, you're going to read the questions through, answer them to the best of your ability, then unpause the video and see whether you got the answers correct. All right, so number 1 says that the school cafeteria has 5 different lunch periods. Now, the thing that we need to be careful of here is that the staff wants to find out which items on the menu are the most popular, but look at what they do. They give every student in the first lunch period a list of questions to answer. So a list of questions to answer would be a survey. So we're going to cross off choice 1 and choice 2. So it's some kind of a survey. But if you look at the difference between choice 3 and choice 4, choice 3 says population survey and choice 4 says sample survey. Because we're only looking at the first lunch period, and the question clearly states that there are 5 lunch periods, that would be a sample survey. So they're only taking a small portion. If they asked every single one of the 5 lunch periods, then it would be a population survey. All right, so number 2, hopefully you see by that second sentence that she separates her sample patients into 2 groups and administers the drug to only one of these groups. That is definitely an experiment, okay? When you separate a population and half gets, let's say in this case, the drug and half does not, that would be a controlled experiment. All right, so why don't you try number 3 and 4. Pause me, read them, do them, and then unpause and see how you did. All right, so number 3 would be choice 4. I don't know why my numbers are off like that, but it should be choice 4 on your page, conducting a controlled experiment. Okay, because we are intentionally intervening and arranging. That's definitely a controlled experiment. Okay, so number 4, the researcher wants to determine if room darkening shades cause people to sleep longer. The best way to determine whether that is true or not would be a controlled experiment. Okay, all right, pause me, do 5 and 6. All right, so number 5, a market research firm needs to collect data on viewer preferences for local news programming in Buffalo. Which method of data collection, make sure we understand that we're just collecting that data, is most appropriate. So when you're trying to find stuff out and collect data, your best method of doing that would be to conduct a survey. Okay, so that would be choice 2. All right, and number 6, which investigation technique is most often used to determine if a single variable has an impact on a given population? So if something has an impact on a given population, again, we're trying to determine, that one would be very similar to like number 4. Okay, so if you look back at number 4, we're trying to determine if room darkening shades cause people to sleep longer. Okay, so do room darkening shades impact whether or not somebody sleeps longer? The best way to investigate that would be a controlled experiment. Okay, so number 6, the answer is choice 3. All right, why don't you turn page? So now what I'm going to ask you to do is, let's do the same thing. This time I want you to do 7, 8, 9, and 10. Please pause the video. Don't just watch the video and copy off of me. Pause the video, read through the questions, and then unpause and check your work, okay? Okay, number 7, in watching auditions for lead singer in a band, Liam became curious as to whether there is an association between how animated the lead singer is and the amount of applause from the audience. He decided to watch each singer and rate the singer on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is the least animated and 5 is the most animated. He did this for all 5 nights of auditions and found that the more animated singers did receive louder applause. The study Liam conducted would be best described as an observation. Okay, so that would be choice 2. Okay, he's not separating groups and manipulating one and not manipulating another. He's merely sitting there, making observations, and That's about it. Okay, let's look at number 8. Which scenario is best described as an observational study? Okay, let's look at choice 1. For a class project, students in health class ask every 10th student entering the school if they eat breakfast every morning or in the morning. That's a survey, so that's not it. Choice 2. A social researcher wants to learn whether or not there is a link between attendance and grades. She gathers data from 15 school districts. Okay, so we've had debate over this question before in the past, and kids are like, that's not an observational study. That is actually the answer. And if you're not really following, hold on, because none of the other answers, all the other answers, I should say, are clearly not observations. So it is choice 2. Let's look at choice 3, though. A researcher wants to learn whether or not there is a link between children's daily amount of physical activity and their overall energy level. So during lunch at the local high school, she distributed a short questionnaire. Questionnaire, that's a survey. I'm going to put an S here and an S here. That's a survey, so that's clearly not an observational study. Let's look at number 4. 60 seniors taking a course in advanced algebra concepts are randomly divided into 2 classes. One class uses a graphing calculator all the time, and the other class never uses a graphing calculator. Right there, you're dividing the class randomly into 2 groups. One gets calculator, the other group doesn't. That is an experiment. So that clearly is not an observational study. So by default, choice 2 is the answer. All right, let's look at number 9. Which task is not a component of an observational study? And if you look at choice 1, the researcher decides who will make up the sample. That is true. And we want which one's false. The researcher analyzes the data received from the sample. That is true. The researcher gathers data from the sample using surveys or taking measurements. That is true. But look at this last one. The researcher divides the sample into 2 groups, with one group acting as a control group. That is not true. Choice 4 is an experiment. So that is your answer. All right, so number 10. Which statement about statistical analysis is false? Okay, so I'm going to look and see which ones are true. How about that? Experiments can suggest patterns and relationships in data. That is true. So I'm going to cross that one out. Experiments can determine cause and effect relationships. That is also true. Remember, the only thing that, or statistical study that can determine cause and effect is an experiment, okay? So that is true, so I'm crossing that one off. All right, choice 3, observational studies can determine cause and effect. Well, what did I just say? The only statistical study that can determine cause and effect are experiments. The only statistical study that can determine cause and effect are experiments. So this is false. Okay, and if you look at choice 4, that is true. Observational studies can suggest patterns and relationships. Okay? All right, turn the page. I want you to take some time, read this question, answer what you can, and then unpause the video and we'll see how you did. Okay, so the orange juice processing plant receives a truckload of oranges. That's your population. Okay, so what's happening? There's a processing plant, there's a truck, it's got a whole bunch of oranges in the back of the truck, and it's coming into the plant. That's your population. Now, the quality control team randomly chooses 3 pails of oranges. That's your sample. Okay, the 3 pails of 50 oranges, if you want to say that as well. So to identify the sample, that would be the 3 pails of oranges, and the population, that would be your truckload of oranges. Okay. Last thing, state one conclusion that the quality control team could make about the population if 5% of the sample was found to be unsatisfactory. Okay, so there's a lot of different answers for this particular part of the question, but if 5% of the sample is bad, now remember, the sample is just the 3 pails of oranges, not the whole truckload. So if 5% of the sample is bad, then we can assume that 5% of the entire population is bad. Okay, that's one very straightforward answer. The other one that maybe a lot of people tend to pick is if 5% of the sample is bad, then 95% of the sample is good. Okay, so that's another option as well. For question number 12, it says to describe how a controlled experiment. Okay, sorry about that interruption. So describe how a controlled experiment can be created to examine the effects of ingredient X in a toothpaste. This seems like a very strange question, and believe it or not, it was on the Regents, and a lot of kids were like, what am I supposed to do? So here is an example of what I wrote. Okay, so the most important couple of things would be they're asking for a controlled experiment. So you have to use the word, or the words really, randomly assigned. Controlled experiments are always randomly assigned. Then, and usually, to 2 equal groups. Okay, then when you split those 2 groups, one group would actually get the toothpaste with ingredient X, and the other group would basically not. And so you're just showing whoever is grading your test that you understand a controlled experiment deals with randomly assigned groups, and that half the group gets whatever they're referring to, in this case, ingredient X in the toothpaste, and the other half does not. So something like that, and that's it. Okay, make sure you're writing this down in your notes packet. All right, so if you turn to page 6 in your notes packet, you will see there's a definition for the word bias. So a flaw in the experiment design or data collection process. We don't really get into this too much because, to be honest with you, I think most of you will think of this as pretty, second nature, common sense. So if you want to, why don't you take a minute, and I bet you if you did 13, 14, and 15, you wouldn't have any problems with it. Okay, so pause the video, do those, and then unpause, and we can go over the answers. All right, so 13 says a survey is to be conducted in a small upstate village to determine whether or not local residents should fund construction of a skateboard park by raising taxes. Which segment of the population would provide the most unbiased response? So in other words, the most fair response. And a club of local skateboard enthusiasts, choice 1, no, because obviously they want it, so that's a little biased. 2, senior citizens living on a fixed income. Not too many senior citizens are using skateboards, and if they're on a fixed income, they don't have a lot of money, so they're not going to want their taxes to go up. Which would lead us into choice 3, which is a group opposed to any increase in taxes. Okay, but if you look at number 4, it says every 10th person 18 years of age or older walking down Main Street. So that would be the most logical answer to make sure that we have an unbiased response. Okay, let's look at number 14. So Cheap and Fast Gas Station is conducting a consumer satisfaction survey, and which method of collecting data would most likely lead to a biased sample? Okay. So choice 1, interviewing every 5th customer to come into the station. That actually sounds very unbiased. Seems like a good idea to get accurate kind of results. Choice 2, interviewing customers chosen at random by a computer at the checkout. Again, that sounds unbiased to me, fair. Choice 3, interviewing customers who call an 800 number posted on the customer's receipt. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And choice 4, interviewing every customer who comes into the station on a day of the week, again, chosen at random. So that sounds very unbiased. So it is choice 3. So we've had kind of debates over this before. I mean, really basically what you have to do is eliminate the ones that you know are unbiased, and the one left over would be the answer choice. And here's why. Interviewing customers who call an 800 number, not for anything. I go to the post office a lot of times, and they're like, oh, here's your receipt, and call this number or go online and give us a good review. I don't ever do it. I throw my receipt out. So that would require people to actually, in this case, in this scenario, call an 800 number. It's probably not the most effective way to get an unbiased sample. All right, number 15, Mrs. Favada's statistics class wants to conduct a survey to see how students feel about changing the school mascot's name. Sounds familiar, right? Which plan is the best process for gathering an appropriate sample? So in other words, unbiased. We want it to be fair. Choice 1, survey students in a random sample of senior homerooms. Well, then you're only asking the seniors, and everybody else's voice and opinion don't count. So that's not an appropriate sample. 2, survey every 10th student entering art classes. No good. 3, survey every 4th student entering the cafeteria during lunch period. That sounds pretty fair to me. Let's check choice 4, okay? Choice 4, survey all members of the school's varsity sports team. No. So in that case, we would say the answer is choice 3. Okay, so please make sure you have all of these notes in your notes packet. What you're going to do now is you are going to go to Edpuzzle, and your sequences part 4 is due tomorrow night. So you're going to work on that with the remainder of the period right now. So start that Edpuzzle. Make sure you take notes in your notes packet. And you will also have tomorrow night to do it. So you're probably not going to get through the whole thing by the time the bell rings. But anyway, get moving and shaking. All right, bye guys.